Hi, I'm Kimba Gosier with Diary of a Sickle Cell Journey. I'm very honored and privileged to be in the presence of a miracle. I'm here with Mr. Sebastian and his mom, Natalie. Sebastian has a wonderful story about how he is now sickle cell free from a bone marrow transplant. So I'll start with his mom. Natalie, at what age was Sebastian diagnosed with sickle cell anemia?
Sebastian was diagnosed with sickle cell at birth. We received a letter in the mail from the hospital. That's how I found out that he had sickle cell SS.
Okay, SS. And SS, for those of you who don't know, is considered to be the most severe form of sickle cell disease. So, Natalie, what were some of the things that, the challenges that he faced with sickle cell anemia?
With sickle cell, Sebastian didn't have a lot of pain crisis. He had maybe one or two. But at the age of 3, he had a stroke. After the stroke, we had multiple blood transfusions. He had an iron overload. He needed to take medication for that. So it was the amount of iron that was in his body that we had the challenge with and the medication that he had to take.
Okay. And Sebastian, do you remember when you had the stroke?
I don't really remember when I had the stroke, but I remember things that happened when I had the stroke. Like, my right leg was always, like, it started hurting, and I couldn't really feel my right leg, and my right arm, I couldn't even pick it up because it hurt so much. And when I was at the hospital, I was afraid of being treated.
Wow. And that's another thing that people aren't aware of. People with sickle cell, especially when they're children, they are at risk for a stroke. When you think about a stroke, you mainly think about someone in a nursing home, an older person, but children with sickle cell are at high risk. Some of them are at high risk for a stroke. What would you advise, like if there was a parent out there right now of a young child with sickle cell disease, what were some of the signs that you saw in him that you didn't, when he had his stroke?
When he had his stroke, he had a lot of weakness. He felt tired, and I didn't know really what was going on. If you ask the child to smile and the child cannot smile, or if you ask the child to lift up his arms and the child is unable to, it may be a sign of stroke, that the child is stroking, which I was not aware. So thank God we took him to the hospital on time, or it could have been worse. But I was not aware of the signs.
Right. So those are some of the things that you should look for. Now, was it difficult for you to come to the decision of him undergoing the transplant?
For me, it was easy because I could imagine him living through all these blood transfusion and the iron overload, because he started at the age of 3 with the transfusion. So for me, it was an easy decision because I did my research and I knew that there wasn't many choices out there. So for me, it was easy. It's not easy for everyone. And I was aware of the pros and the cons. You have to know the positive and the negative, because sometimes the negative outweigh the positive. So you have to make sure you get a second opinion. You read the research, the literature, and maybe you try to talk to other families who've been through it.
Right. Now, what was that like for him, undergoing the transplant? Can you give a little bit of information about that?
The actual transplant didn't take very long. It was a few minutes, putting the cells inside his body. That process was not complicated. It's afterward. So it's not the actual transplant, it's the post-transplant. The medication, the fatigue, the side effects. So it's more after that. And the post-transplant lasts 4 years, 5 years and more. And for some children, they have graft versus host, which means you could start with sickle cell and end up with another illness.
Wow.
So I think you have to be clear about your decision and what you want, because there was one parent that I met that regretted having the transplant. Wow. Because the other illness that the child had was worse than the sickle cell when she had it.
Wow.
So you have to do your research, and you have to know if you could live with your decision and if it's worth it for you as a parent. And for me, I knew that whatever decision I made, I would have no regret, no matter what happened afterwards. But it's a complicated process, and it lasts a few years. So it's not like you have the transplant and then the child doesn't have sickle cell anymore and you just move on. It's a process. We've been at the emergency room several times. We've had major complications on and off throughout the 5 years.
Wow. Okay. And he was how old when he actually had the successful transplant?
The first transplant, he was 5. Mm-hmm. The second transplant, he was 8.
He was 8. And you mentioned to me previously that he had an unrelated donor. Can you give us a little bit of information about that? Because a lot of us are under the impression that you have to have an absolute match for it to be successful.
You don't. We had the search done through the National Donor Program. I think that's the name. Mm-hmm. And he was able to find 3 unrelated donors. So they took the best match. So it does not have to be related. I think there's a stereotype that there's not enough donors.
Right.
Or it has to be from the same race, which his was not. So we're able to obtain a match for him. So you run the search through the National Organ Donor Program, and that's how we were able to get a match for him. It was an unrelated process.
That's amazing. And Sebastian, you're how old now?
I'm 13 now.
13. Do you remember the process of going through the bone marrow? Like, how did you feel?
Yes, it was like really overwhelming because you had to go through all the IVs and you had to go through them putting the IVs and everything you would go through. Like, it would be really painful. Mm-hmm. And all the medication. After a certain point, like, you would just get tired of it or get used to it because you have it so many times at the hospital. Mm-hmm. So it really got overwhelming.
Yeah, that's a lot, especially when you're so young. Okay, so what is life like for Sebastian now? I know that previously, years ago, just like in the case of my daughter, a lot of people say, okay, someone with sickle cell, don't expect them to live past the age of 30. I remember when my daughter was 2 years old, I had an ignorant doctor tell me not to plan for college for her, which is a very ignorant statement. But what would you say about Sebastian, his prognosis now, his outlook now?
His outlook now is very positive. We were having complications the past 3 months. Like, we're going back and forth to the emergency room. He was having pain throughout his body, wow, which is not related to sickle cell because we're post-transplant. His body was just fighting the process. That's what we were told towards the end. So it was not related. For me, I was afraid because I'm thinking he had a transplant. How can he still have pain?
Wow.
But after that, the process has been challenging with school, with different activities. You always have, because his immune system was so weak for so long.
Right.
So, for example, if he's going to play basketball or if he's going swimming, I have to have 2 t-shirts to make sure that I change, that he doesn't catch a cold, maybe like another child. You have to take more precaution. Okay. At school, for example, I always ask for him to have a bottle of water at school. That's been a challenge, to have a bottle of water on his desk. You have to take more precaution maybe than the average child post-transplant.
Okay.
But now that we're 5 years post-transplant, he has respiratory issues. He takes medicine for kidney stones, which is post-transplant. Okay. But the outcome is positive because he's able to go to school, he's able to play basketball, he's able to play soccer, he's on the soccer team. So compared to the difficulties that he had before, things are pretty good.
That's awesome. That's amazing. And Sebastian, let me ask you, so how do you feel now?
Now I feel normal compared to before, because before I didn't have as much energy and as much power as I have now. Like now, like my mom said, I'm able to play sports, I'm able to go to school, so it's a different outcome.
That's great. That's amazing. And I would like to ask Natalie one last question. Do you have any advice for any parents out there who may have young children that aren't as informed and might want to look into a transplant?
First, you have to speak to your doctor. If your doctor doesn't give you the information, you have to do the research. You have to contact different hospitals, which I did, to see what's out there. Maybe there's one state that has more research, more protocol than another state regarding transplant. But basically, you have to do your homework, because your doctor or the hospital may not give you all the information. If there's workshops out there, try to go to the workshops, try to contact different parents. And when you make a decision, make sure that you stand firm on your decision. No matter what the doctor may say or somebody else, it's what you could live with.
Right.
And there's always a risk. It's not that you have a transplant and then everything is okay. That's not the way to happen. So there are pros and cons, and maybe your transplant is not for every child. So basically you have to do your research, and hopefully you have a doctor or hospital that supports you. If not, look for another doctor or another hospital. You need like a second opinion if you're not sure, but do your research.
Right. Now, Sebastian, I have one last question for you. Earlier you told me something about you felt like a lion previously. Can you elaborate on that for me?
Well, I was always at home, never being able to experience the world outside, so I always used to say I feel like a lion in a cage, because usually a lion in a cage, they're trapped, so they're not able to go outside, and especially because lions are meant to be in the jungle and be free. So for me, it was different. I wasn't like every other kid out there. I had to stay home and try to stay safe and everything, so I don't have another issue. So it was different from the norm.
Right, I understand. And now you feel normal.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I'm happy for you.
Thank you.
So thank you. I hope you guys got some great information. I hope you were educated. Get out there in your communities. Make a difference. We need all the support we can get. Thank you, and this has been a Diary of a Sickle Cell Journey.